First Corinthians chapter 13 is our jumping off place. First Corinthians chapter 13. Just a reminder, this letter, the Apostle Paul, by inspiration, is writing to the troubled church at Corinth. I don't think it's a stretch to call them that. They have multiple problems. In fact, we could say that every time you turn the page in First Corinthians, you find another problem. That seems to be this, I started to say singular focus, but it's more like a shotgun approach than a rifle to this letter. It's just really all about their problems, their questions. But remember, and we'll reiterate this when we transition into Second Corinthians, I would still argue that this is a good church. Yeah, they had problems. They had a lot of problems, and some of them very big problems. But they were good, number one, because they recognized they had problems. Remember, it seems that from our reading of this letter that Paul is addressing problems that he's heard from them about. Chapter 1, Chloe's household wrote to him. Beginning in chapter 7, he says, now concerning the things of which you wrote to me. And so they reached out. They said, hey, we're a mess, Paul. We need some help. And when we get to Second Corinthians, we're going to find out that they responded. They seem to fix all of those problems. There's some problems in Second Corinthians, but they're new problems. And so they've addressed those. One problem that exists is their worship assembly. In chapter 11, again, this is disputable, but some would argue that maybe the idea of the head covering was a problem in the worship assembly. Certainly, the latter part of chapter 11 is a problem in the worship assembly, their abuse and misuse of the Lord's Supper. Now, beginning in chapter 12, 13, and 14, he's dealing with the problem of spiritual gifts. And that sounds strange to say it that way because spiritual gifts shouldn't be a problem. But it had become a problem. And so he deals with that. Chapter 12, remember, he does a few things. He lists some spiritual gifts, lists 9 there in chapter 12, 9 different spiritual gifts. I don't know whether that's an exhaustive list or just kind of a summarization of some of the, what we might consider the main gifts that are there. But there seem to be, from chapter 12, we'll find more when we get to chapter 14, but there seemed to be this concept that one gift was better than another, and I'm better than you if I have, and in particular, we're going to find out again in chapter 14, the gift of tongues was thought to be the best. And so let's say I have the gift of tongues, Mark has the gift of prophecy, Howard has the gift of healings, and so I was strutting around like a rooster thinking I'm better than Mark and Howard because I have the gift of tongues. Chapter 14, he's going to tell them, no, in fact, if I was ranking them, tongues is going to be down toward the bottom. But chapter 12 points out it doesn't matter. Remember the hand, foot, eye, ear illustration there. We're all important, we're all necessary in that. And so he concludes chapter 12. Let's back up one verse because you could argue that the last verse of chapter 12 maybe belongs in chapter 13. If not, it is certainly a transition because he says, but earnestly desire the best gifts, or some translations say the greater gifts, and yet I show you a more excellent way. And so here's the question. I show you a more excellent way. Where does the arrow point from that? Does it point back to what he's just been talking about? The idea of unity and recognizing the value of each other's gifts. That's the more excellent way, is to put your gifts in perspective. Or does the arrow point forward, or in my Bible, down to chapter 13, where the more excellent way is love? It really could go either way, couldn't it? I might argue that it's pointing down or forward to chapter 13. And you could even make this argument, maybe it's a stretch, when he says, again in verse 31 of chapter 12, but earnestly desire the best or greater gifts. Is he arguing, which he kind of will in chapter 14, that some gifts really are better than others? I think that's even inherent in the illustration I think Paul is assuming that the hand's better than the foot in that illustration. And so some of these gifts are more prominent, we might say, better, greater, more prominent in that. And so maybe he is saying uh, that about the gifts, that there is a ranking. But you could make the argument that the better or greater gift that he's saying you should have is love, which is going to be the subject of chapter 13. You're arguing over healing versus tongues, and I'm telling you the best gift is love. And so maybe that's the better or greater gifts that he's talking about. So, all right, we transition. At first, it's going to seem a little bit of a break when talking about spiritual gifts. Chapter 14, spiritual gifts. Now, chapter 13 is just this awkward wedged in there chapter about love, but it's not out of place. It ties back in to what he's talked about the unity in the body. That's going to be prompted on love. I'm not going to think I'm better than you because, first of all, he's already argued I'm not, but also because I love you. And even if I am better than you, I'm not going to treat you like that in that regard. And so here we go. First, chapter 13, verse 1. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I have become as a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. So a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal just means it's just noise. So if you're speaking in tongues with that spiritual gift that existed in the first century, the ability to be able to speak a foreign language that you were not schooled in, that if you do that without love, it's just noise. That's all it is. It brings to mind the idea of, it's coming up to gift giving season. By the way, I wear a 2XL. No, just kidding, just kidding. Gift giving season, and what's our expression about gifts? It's the thought that counts. Now, a lot of men want to use the excuse, well, we just buy you something lousy, but it's the thought that counts. That saying is not an excuse to give poor gifts. The concept is that's what really matters. It's not the gift. It's just that thought of you in giving that gift. And here's that concept here, that it's not the gift itself, it's the heart and the attitude behind it can completely negate that gift. Not negated in the sense that you can no longer speak in tongues, but that it is no value to the body, to use as illustration. John?
It's good to note that Jesus sets the standard about being great when he said, the Gentiles lord it over one another, but it won't be that way with you. He who would be the greatest would actually be like the least.
Yeah.
I'm washing your feet. Look at what I'm doing. I came to serve. It's like I'm a king, but here I am washing your feet. And then Paul says later on, I'm not sure what book it is, but he says, outdo one another in zeal, outdo one another in love. And so that's really what we should strive for in being great in the kingdom is the more we love and save souls there are levels, there are ranks, there are going to be ranks
Yeah.
at the table, those who have done more, who've worked harder, who've saved souls or whatnot. And so I think we should be eager to be greater by being more loving,
Yeah.
being closer to Christ, being more like Christ.
That's a great tie-in, the statement, outdo one another in love, because if it's going to be a contest, it's not a contest over who's more important. It's a contest. The contest is who's going to love more. And that's good competition there. But yeah, good point. Couple introductory things here in verse 1. Number 1 is if you have the old King James, or you probably remember, if you're like me, you grew up, that's what you did your memory verses in. What word is used here in chapter 13 instead of love in the old King James? Charity. Yeah, charity. And that's been kind of controversial. I think we're unfair, first of all, to the King James version, the old King James version, because sometimes we say it's a bad translation. And I would argue there's maybe a couple places where they did a bad job. One is translating Hades into hell and not making that distinction, which the Bible clearly makes. But for the most part, it's a good translation for the 1600s. The words have changed their meaning, and so it may not be the best version, I would argue, for today's language, English language, But in the 1600s, that was a good word. And I would argue charity was a good word because, again, for then, maybe not now, because you think about what is charity. Charity is the idea of you giving to somebody expecting nothing in return. That's kind of the definition of charity. Well, that's really what this word love means, is the idea of I'm doing something for somebody who has never done anything for me, probably never will do anything for me, and I'm just doing it one-sided. And that's this idea of agape. I know you've heard that word before. Agape love is that concept. I'm not loving you because you love me. I'm not loving you because you're a nice person. I'm not loving you because you gave me something or I'm expecting that in return. I just love you because that's what I'm supposed to do. It's in some sense, and I don't mean to give it the wrong flavor here, but it's an unemotional love. It's not based on emotion at all. It's based on reason that here, like charity is. Nick?
Going there and he's talking about all these gifts. And if you ask me what's more powerful, being able to do miracles, heal people, and all that, or just love somebody, I would think first off that it would be more able to heal people.
Yeah.
Do miracles. But God's saying, no, it's love. Love is a more powerful thing to have and to do than miracles are.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful thing. Number one. Number two, anybody can do that. You don't have to have those special gifts.
Spiritual gift, yeah.
Anybody can have love, and when you see it, it's more powerful than miracles. What power all of us have that God's given.
Yeah, yeah, excellent point. This is a universal gift and is more meaningful to God and should be to us. And so he's in the first three verses, he's going to use the argument if you do this without love, it means nothing. And so three different illustrations, three different points. Now let's start. The most difficult one is the first one. I speak with the tongues of men and of angels. Well, speak with the tongues of men, I got that. That's, again, Acts chapter 2 shows us that was just the languages, the various languages of men that were spoken miraculously. But what's the tongues of angels? What can that be? By the way, while you're thinking of your profound answer on that, are some of our friends in the religious world who claim to practice the gift of tongues today will point to this verse. In fact, not everybody. There's no such thing as everybody says this, but many of them would argue, as we would, that Acts chapter 2 is foreign languages. But 1 Corinthians 13 is different. This is a different kind of tongues than that tongues. And here's their verse. They go, you can't understand this, and it's because it's not the tongues of men. When I speak in tongues today, I'm speaking with the tongues of angels. And that's the language that I'm speaking a language, but it's the tongues of angels. And that's where they would make their argument that there's two different types of tongues in the Bible. And what we're doing today is the gift of the tongues of angels. My answer to that would be a couple things. Number one is I think they're abusing this verse, but also, why just that one? Why not the other one? If they could do, let's just assume, I don't think that's a correct assumption, but for argument's sake, let's assume they're two different types. They could do both. Why is just one of them? And by the way, the unverifiable one, that's quite a coincidence, is the one that's still in existence versus the tongues of men. And so that would be one certainly argument I would make against that. But any thoughts about what the tongues of angels? It seems to me, Nick, were you?
I'm pretty sure when God created heaven and the earth and everything else, they weren't speaking sprint, in heaven.
Yeah.
Whatever it may be. There may have been a language they had that we don't.
Yeah. It's funny. We always just assume that they're speaking English, right? I've always assumed that English with a Southern accent, but that's like I said, that no sense in thinking that that's the case. That they may be an angelic language that we're just not privy to. But as we track these three verses, it seems to me that what he's doing, he's going to say, if you can do this, which is kind of a normal thing, or if you can do this, which is kind of an outlandish thing. Let's follow that. Verse 2, though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, there were some of those spiritual gifts that are listed, so that I could remove mountains. But have not love, I am nothing. Now, we know that Matthew 17, Jesus says you can have that faith, but as far as I know, there's no record, biblical or otherwise, of anybody actually through their faith moving a mountain. And so there seemed to be maybe some hyperbole there. But he's saying if you can do these things, the gift of prophecy, understand mysteries, that's something that's doable. And even if you can move a mountain, which again we would argue maybe in Jesus' words was hyperbole. They wasn't really saying the apostles were going to go around moving mountains. That's just how powerful your faith is. Verse 3, though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, well, that's something I can do. Though I give my body to be burned, oh, I'm not going to do that. But have not love. A lot of questions for me there. How is giving my body to be burned going to help the poor? I'm not sure. Maybe that's a separate thing. But again, it seems like he starts with what we might call a reasonable thing that they could have done in the first century, and then an unreasonable thing. Give your body to be burned, move mountains, speak in the tongues of angels. And so, even if you could do this, and even do the undoable, it seems to me that would be the best way of looking at this, that literally moving a mountain, giving your body to be burned, and the tongues of angels are kind of the out there kind of things that you could do. But regardless, his main point is this: whatever you do, a thing that can be done, and even a thing that maybe can't be done or is a stretch to be done, and if you do them without love, he says that it's just noise, empty noise. Verse 1, I am nothing. Verse 2, and it profits me nothing. Verse 3. Now, what's interesting about this is this does not seem to be arguing that in the absence of love, you won't be able to do those things. I think his assumption is you can do them without love. But the absence of love makes them null and void. And so it's not the idea that you can't do that your spiritual gifts would go away if you didn't have love. I would kind of think that would be a default. God would just take it away from him. Hey, he's a jerk. Don't let him speak in tongues. I don't need him being a jerk in 2 languages, and so, but that's not the case. It just simply says it accomplishes nothing. And so I've used this illustration before, but I think it fits here. The point of this, well, there's 2 points. Number 1 is that what we do must be motivated by love, and it is without love. And so my illustration is God's not the IRS. The IRS wants your money. We all agree on that. But the IRS could care less how you feel about that. In fact, you write out your check to the IRS. If you're somebody like me that has to write out checks to the IRS, in that little memo section at the bottom left, I could put in there, hate this, or I hate the IRS. Are they still going to cash my check? Yeah, they are. They don't care whether I'm a Republican, a Democrat, a communist, anti-American. They just want your money. And that's all you fulfilled. They check that box. Ken's good for 2025. He's paid his taxes. There's nothing on there about being patriotic, loving my country, loving the IRS, feeling good about this. It's just do the deed, pay the money. God's not that way, is he? Now, we need to be careful that we don't swing that pendulum the other way. God does care that we do things, and he cares how we do those things. And so there's that balance, but he also cares as much, if not more, about our attitude in that. If we approach God like we approach the IRS, like, oh, I don't want to do this, I hate writing these checks, we obviously understand God's not accepting anything we do. Our worship, there's passages that talk about that our worship can be null and void. We did all the right things, but not with the right attitude. And so here again, in the context, he's saying you're doing the spiritual gifts. In fact, he might argue you're doing a pretty good job mechanically doing the spiritual gifts, but you got it all wrong because it's profiting you nothing. It's just noise, and you are nothing because you're not doing it out of love. And now he begins in verse 4 with the section that we're most familiar with, and that is the explanation of what's love going to look like. Larry?
Paul says that some people are preaching Christ from selfish ambition and doing it completely with the wrong motives and not out of love. But even you can preach Christ without love. And
Yeah, even that one of the most prominent parts of the body, we might argue, the hand of the eye there, that you can do it without that proper motivation. And Paul was saying there that I'm kind of okay with that, but God's not, is the point here, that God wants the heart, he wants that attitude. All right, here's a good exercise, and you've probably heard this before. In this section, you can take the word love, two exercises, and go through and read it, and read it instead of love, insert the word God. John tells us God is love, and so God is all of these things. Another exercise is go back through and read it and insert your name. And are you having the kind of cringe when you say that? That Ken suffers long and is kind. Is that true? It should be, but is that true? And so love suffers long. That means it's patient, it's tolerant, it puts up with foibles and mistakes, and is just kind. That's the really manifestation of love, the real life, hands-on kind of idea. It's just nice to people. It doesn't envy. It's not hateful of what some others might have. We normally think of envy and jealousy with the idea of possessions, and I guess they're kind of possessions, but in this context, he's probably talking about spiritual gifts. Don't be envious. If you're the foot, don't be envious of that hand that has what you think is a better spiritual gift. Love does not parade itself. The old illustration of a rooster, walking around, strutting around, doesn't parade itself, and it's not puffed up. Now, don't really know the difference between parading itself and being puffed up. It may just be repetition. Puffed up is a very descriptive term, though, isn't it? We just think of that person that's just puffed up and you got a swelled chest, maybe a swelled head in that. Love doesn't put itself first, is the point of verse 4. Verse 5 does not behave rudely. This is a section of scripture that we're all very familiar with. We could get close to kind of almost, if we put all our heads together, quoting it, couldn't we? We could put all the elements in here. We've heard this so much. But don't let the familiarity with this text lose its meaning. Rude, kind, and then rude are two concepts maybe we don't talk about enough. It's just simply, it's not rude. And I've said this before. But the idea of people making excuses for themselves or for someone else to say, "Well, that's just the way I am," I'm just blunt and I just speak my mind. I have two comments about that. If somebody says that's just the way I am, well, the way you am is a jerk. And number two is you need to repent. You don't say that about any other thing. I'm an adulterer. That's just who I am. My grandpa was, and my dad. No, that's no excuse. That's what repentance is for you to change who you are if it's not godly, and this isn't godly behavior. Nick?
Family member used to say, well, it's a sin to think it, so you might as well say it too.
Two wrongs make a right, I guess. Yeah. 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 Instead of fixing the one thing that's wrong, double down and do two things that are wrong. Yeah. That's good reasoning. Yeah. Adam?
Whenever you're considering your spouse, that you need to see if you can put their name in this. You put your own name and go through it. Okay, yeah, I got all these boxes checked. Look at me. Then
Yeah.
okay, well, what about the person you're looking to be serious with here? Do they fit these boxes? Or you can think about that for family members or whatever else too. And then
Yeah.
go from there.
Or if you could get your spouse to be completely open and honest with you, ask your spouse, "Am I that?" Can you read that Yeah. Can you read that without breaking out into laughter? Yeah, good point. Love doesn't seek its own. It's not selfish. It's not provoked, not easily provoked. I think some translations say that's not going to fly off the handle, has that short, fused temper. Thinks no evil. Now, there's two ways of interpreting that. Thinks no evil. Love personified and embodied in us is not plotting to do evil. That's kind of what Nick was just saying. I'm thinking it now, I'm going to say it. And so I don't think of ways to do evil. But the other way of thinking of it, and I think this maybe hits closer based upon the following verse, is the idea that I don't think evil of you. That seems to me that what he's saying is love seeks the best of its object and sees the best. We don't jump to an unreasonable conclusion that, the illustration, if I drive by your house and I see a couple beer cans in the yard, I'm not immediately going to assume those are yours. I'm going to think the best that somebody threw those in your yard, and that you didn't do, and so that's kind of that concept that I don't just, it doesn't mean that we're just completely unreasonably gullible that, oh, well, I don't, no, but we see the best in everyone. We don't think evil of them. In fact, one translation says, keeps no accounts of evil. That I don't keep that track record of what you have done, even if it really was wrong. Verse 6 does not rejoice in iniquity, doesn't rejoice in sinfulness and bad things of others, but rejoices in the truth. That's what we care about. Bears all things. It endures even wrongs that are done to us, believes all things. Again, maybe there's the idea of believing the best of others, believing what God has taught us, hopes and endures all things. So again, there's just a personification as if love were a person. This is what love's going to do. And again, insert yourself in there. Am I that? If not, what do I need to work on to be better? Love never fails. Now, let's talk about that concept of fails. It's used in a little bit different sense in the way we use the word. When I think about failing, I think about school. I failed the test, or I failed that course, or that assignment. That is, I did bad in it. I didn't do enough to get the passing grade. That's not the sense in which it means fails here. Fails here means in the idea of ends, ceases to exist. And so love is forever is the point. It never fails. It never ends. It never gives out is the idea. But whether there are prophecies, so here he's going, and here's why I would argue that chapter 12, verse 31, seek the better gifts, and I show you a more excellent way, is pointing to this, because now he's going to talk about these spiritual gifts, and he's going to say they're going to fail. That is, they're going to come to an end, but love is not. So love is a better gift. We could argue it's a better gift in a lot of ways, but his argument here is a better gift because it endures. It never ends. Then there's no expiration date to that. There's an expiration date to these spiritual gifts. Whether they are prophecies, they will fail. Now again, don't think somebody prophesied something and it didn't happen. That's prophecy failing. That's not what he's saying. Prophecies are going to end, is the idea of failing. Not that, oh, well, 50-50, I gave a prophecy and maybe it's right, maybe I failed. That's not that. Failed in the sense of ceasing or ending. There are prophecies, they will fail. And you can see that by the synonyms that he uses. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. And so cease and fail are the same idea. And whether there's knowledge, it will vanish away. So fail, cease, vanish away just means they're going to come to an end. So he lists three, maybe we could argue three of the more prominent spiritual gifts. They're going to end. They're going to vanish away. They're going to cease. Now, the $64,000 question is when? He said they have an expiration date, these spiritual gifts. When is it? And there's two arguments generally that are made. Here's the argument I'm going to make, that they're going to end when the revelation is complete. They're just not needed anymore. Others, some of our religious friends who, again, claim to still be practicing these things, say, no, it's going to end at the second coming. We don't need those in heaven. We don't, and then that's when it's going to end. And so let's see if the text is going to help us to figure that out. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. Now, there's the key, I think, into the timing of all of this. Paul is saying in his time, we got to realize that this is timely. In the first century, he says, we know in part and we prophesy in part. We just have parts of it. And so there's the key. Knowledge and prophecy, which were, again, back to chapter 12, are both spiritual gifts. Don't think of knowledge in the sense of we know things. He said knowledge was a spiritual gift in that time. Prophecy was a spiritual gift in that time. And he says it's partial. But, verse 10, that which is perfect has come. Then that which is in part will be done away with. Again, perfect, as we've talked in other contexts, just simply means complete, the whole. It doesn't mean the way we often use the word perfect. We use the word perfect that is just flawless, that it is just this perfection. There's nothing could be changed about it to make it any better. The word perfect that is used here in its pure sense just means it's complete, mature. And so in that sense, and you could probably argue in that sense alone, I could say I have a perfect body because it's complete. It's not going to grow anymore except out. But, it's a child, their body's not perfect. An adult's body is perfect, or it's complete. It's through growing. And so that's the idea, that it's reached its state of maturity. There's no more to be done. You've done all you can do with it. It's full. And so how do we identify that which is perfect? Well, I think he's given us a huge hint or clue here. If we can identify the part, then we can identify the whole, right? Let me give an illustration. And again, I don't know why, but so many of my illustrations are about food. But let's say you're at a potluck and there's this meringue pie there. I love meringue pies, but there's one disadvantage to them. Before you cut them, you don't know what's in them. And so you walk up to this, and a couple of us are standing there and go, what do you think that is? Is it lemon? Maybe it's coconut, or maybe it's chocolate. And so how are we going to find out? Well, let's say I'm the brave one. I'll fall on this grenade for y'all. I'll eat the first piece of pie. And so I cut that piece of pie and I scoop it out and I put it on my plate and I walk over. You've walked away and I walk over to you and say, and I just point at it, and it's chocolate meringue pie. Forget the 2XL. That's what I want for Christmas. Anyway, chocolate meringue pie. And I show you that piece. What do you assume the rest of the pie? The whole pie was chocolate, wasn't it? If the part of it is chocolate, then the whole is chocolate. And so that which is in part is knowledge and prophecy. Then that which is complete or perfect comes. Perfect what? Perfect knowledge, perfect prophecy, complete knowledge, complete prophecy. That makes sense, that tracking? So to me, it's not talking about heaven. That's going to be perfection, but that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about knowledge and prophecy. That's the part. Then that which is complete has come. The part will be done away with. And so the part identifies the complete. It's full, complete, perfect knowledge. And again, by this definition of the word perfect, we have that, don't we? We have perfect prophecy. We have perfect knowledge. It's all been revealed. And so the parts are go away. The partial will go away. Verse 11, another illustration. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, and I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Now, if we were really making this the point rather than the illustration, we would say, or at least you should. We all know of some that haven't put away childish things, but we have. He's not really here talking about being childish. He's talking about, again, the idea of knowledge, growth, and maturity. That was fine. Nobody scolds a young child, for not being able to properly use a fork or a spoon. Do we? We know that they haven't learned that yet. We're teaching them. And so, but when we become an adult, those things We don't need them anymore. Hopefully, we'll need the bib. We don't need the train. We don't need the plate that suctions down to the table so we don't knock it off. That was partial things. It was fine for then, but now doesn't make sense. We don't need that. I don't need the high chair anymore. I don't need the bib. I don't need the special rubber spoon. I put away those things because I have completion now. And so what he's saying here is that these spiritual gifts were for the immature and not the immature Christian. He's not saying we're more mature than they were as Christians, but he's saying that our environment, our spiritual environment, was childish. We have the complete thing. We have an advantage. In fact, we have it backwards sometimes, don't we? We think about, Peter, James, and John, and we're jealous of them. I'd have loved to have been there, at the Mount of Transfiguration or the Sermon on the Mount. Man, they had it made. No, the scripture actually says Peter, James, and John are envious of us. We've got it made. We've got the whole complete revealed word of God. They didn't. They knew in part. They prophesied in part. We've got the perfect. We've got the everything. And so what happens to the incomplete, the part, what happens to the childish when the complete is there? It's not needed anymore. It's failed. It's ceased. It's done away with. And so that's how we would argue the timing of this, that these spiritual gifts served a purpose in that immature state of Christianity, but it doesn't have a purpose anymore. What do we need that for? And let's think about it this way. In the first century, somebody came into the church building at Corinth on a Sunday morning and said, God sent me, and he told me to tell you something, so I want to preach today. I think they'd have been as skeptical as we are. Like, we don't even know you. How do we know that God told you to tell us that? Or you're not just making it up? In other words, I want some proof. Kind of, I use the cop illustration. I want to see your badge. I want to see your papers. Make sure that you really are here. Well, the gifts, the miracles were that. They began to speak in tongues. They healed somebody. They did some other kind of miracle. And our conclusion ought to be that a man couldn't do that. Only God could do that. So God's with them and God's telling them. So, okay, you proved it. Today, somebody comes in Newman Road and says, God sent a message through me to you. What proof? We would say today, what book, chapter, and verse? Tell us. And somebody comes in, and that's the way we evaluate preachers and teachers. We don't think of it that way, but every Sunday you're evaluating me, aren't you? If I start preaching something that's not here, we're going to have a conversation, and eventually I probably have to leave, or at least quit preaching here because you're not doing what God says. And so we have that evaluation. And so there's the point, the timing of this. For now we see in a mirror, now in the first century, we see in a mirror dimly. We can see, but it's not real clear. We don't have all of it, but then face to face. Here's the section that makes people think, well, that sure sounds like heaven. But he's just talking about your vision, your understanding. It was dim, cloudy, but now we can see face to face. I'm not looking in a mirror. I'm not looking through a cloudy glass. Now I know in part, then I shall know just as I am known. So again, he's just talking about the clarity of vision or of understanding of what? Knowledge and prophecy. And now abide faith, hope, and love. We see those three things together so many times. But the greatest of these is love. Now that's a profound statement. Faith and hope. There's anything better than faith? Anything better than hope? He says, yeah, love. Now, is he saying that it's just better in every sense of the word, or is it better? Remember his argument earlier, we're talking about duration. Faith and hope are going to end, aren't they, at some point? But love isn't. We'll have love in heaven. We won't have faith because we walk by sight, not by faith. We won't have hope because our hope is realized, as Paul's going to tell us later. But love is greater because, if for no other reason, because it's the only one of those three that's going to endure forever and ever. John?
You can have faith and hope and be idle, but love is doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So you could argue in other ways that it's superior. That's not saying faith and hope are dispensable, but it is the greater gift. And that's what you need to be striving for. Not tongues, not prophecy, not healings, not miracles. Strive for love. So, all right, we'll finish this. It gets real murky and troublesome in chapter 14 about the use of the spiritual gifts, and we'll look at that next time.